Director of the Cordoba Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership, the President of the Olive Tree Foundation, and the Managing Editor of the online magazine Iqra.ca. Muneeb Nasir is a visiting Imam at various mosques in the Greater Toronto Area and a volunteer Muslim chaplain at the University of Toronto, where he delivers the Friday sermon and conducts the prayer services. He is also a frequent guest speaker at institutions where he promotes greater inner community and interfaith understanding and active citizenship. Educated at the University of Toronto and University of Guelph, Muneeb resides in the city of Toronto with his family. Please, a warm welcome for Mr. Nasir.
Greetings, peace. Assalamu alaikum. I asked him to have a seat. I know the energy level is very low at this moment as we are about to break the fast. I would like to thank IDI of York as well as Islamic Arts of York for this kind invitation to speak to you this evening and to share this iftar dinner. We are gathered here to speak about hunger in the month of Ramadan. In the month of Ramadan, the month in which we are fasting from dawn until sunset. I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. I'm hungry and I'm thirsty, and I'm not eating and drinking, not to punish myself unnecessarily, but because in Islam, fasting has been prescribed by God, Allah, as one of the fundamental pillars of the faith, so that we can achieve greater mindfulness of God. And interestingly, the verse that prescribes fasting reads as follows. It says, "You who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may be mindful of God." God is reminding us, as He prescribes, that we are connected through a common prophetic heritage that traces its lineage to Adam, to Noah, to Abraham, to Moses, to Jesus, and to Muhammad, and all of the prophets and messengers that He sent. So Muslims fast in Ramadan to prioritize God in their lives, to achieve greater spiritual awareness. But this is not the type of fasting we're speaking of tonight. In our title, Fasting and Child Hunger, the conjunction implies that fasting leads to child hunger. The fasting we're speaking of tonight is the involuntary fasting. The fasting in which there is no choice. My fasting is for the purpose of getting closer to God, to purify my soul, to improve my behavior. The involuntary fasting of the hungry is not their choice. It is not their wish. The circumstances have led them to be in this condition. Fasting should have a greater purpose for Muslims beyond spiritual awareness and personal development. Fasting in Ramadan would be an empty gesture unless it is also a call to action. Fasting is asking us to take responsibilities for our lives, for our actions. It is asking us, what are we doing for others? How relevant would be my fasting if it doesn't drive me to be concerned about the poor, the hungry, the sick, and the oppressed? Fasting forces us to be concerned about the thousands of Canadians who are sleeping on the streets of this country every night. It pushes us to empathize with the hungry in the society, which frankly is a disgrace in this country, which affects millions of people, which affects 1 in every child in this province, and which forces 850,000 Canadians to go to food banks. All of our faith traditions teach us that we find God with the sick, with the homeless, and with the hungry. There is a sacred tradition in which God will say on the day of resurrection. He will address us and he will say, O son of Adam, I fell ill and you visited me not. And the person will say, O Lord, how should I visit you when you are the Lord of the worlds? And God will say, did you not know that my servant had fallen sick, had fallen ill, and you visited him not? Did you not know, had you visited him, you would have found me with him? Then God will say, O son of Adam, I asked you for food, and you fed me not. And the person will say, O Lord, how should I feed you when you are the Lord of the worlds? And God will say, did you not know that my servant asked you for food, and you fed him not? Did you not know that had you fed him, you would surely have found the reward for doing so with me? And then God will say, O son of Adam, I asked you to give me to drink, and you gave me not to drink. And the person will say, O Lord, how should I give you to drink when you are the Lord of the worlds? And God will say, my servant asked you to give him to drink, and you gave him not to drink. Had you given him to drink, you would surely have found me with him. This sacred tradition is a plea from the sick, from the hungry, from the thirsty. And the plea is anyone out there? Is anyone out there? And this sacred tradition in Islam reflects the teaching found in the biblical text in Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. These teachings found in our religions are motivation for people of faith to serve the homeless, to visit the sick, to feed the hungry, to take care of the orphan and the vulnerable. In Islam, there's a great emphasis on feeding the hungry. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, he said he is not a believer. He is not a believer whose stomach is filled while his neighbor goes hungry. In another saying, he said, feed the hungry, visit the sick, and free the captives. In the religion, there's this constant exhortation to feed the hungry. The virtues are defined as those who feed the hungry. There's this constant questioning in the Quran to engage the believers, the followers, to develop their moral thinking, to develop their ethical reasoning skills. In a chapter of the Quran that most Muslims have memorized, God says, have you considered the one who denies the judgment? أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. It is the one who pushes aside the orphan and does not feel the urge to feed the needy. Of course, we have heard about Islam legislating zakat, which is the annual charity to rebalance the wealth in our society. It is one of the pillars of the faith, one of the 5 pillars of the faith. So these brief examples show how closely our faith call us to action and how it actually disowns those who do not care about the suffering of the hungry. Now, the case of children is given quite extraordinary emphasis in Islam. Muslims are urged to take care of the orphan, not to violate their rights, not to violate the interests of orphans. The Prophet Muhammad was an orphan. His father died before he was born. His mother died when he was 6. His uncle died when he was 8. And there's a very poignant chapter in the Quran which Muslims have memorized and which they find very touching. Wad-Duha, where God consoles Muhammad at a very low point in his messengership. He was being abused, ridiculed, and the revelation had stopped briefly. And God says, your Lord has not forsaken you, nor does he hate you. The future will be better for you than the past. Your Lord is sure to give you so much that you will be well pleased. Did he not find you an orphan and shelter you? Did he not find you lost and guide you? Did he not find you in need and satisfy your need? After consoling Muhammad, peace be on him, with these assurances, God gives the teaching. He said, so do not be harsh with the orphan, and do not chide the one who asks for help. Now briefly, I just want to say that, in this country, we have passed many resolutions to abolish child hunger. In 1989, there was this famous resolution in the parliament. Yet today, child poverty is increasing from 15.8% in 1989 to 19.2% in 2012. Instead of moving forward, we are pedaling backwards. From what we have heard tonight, hunger is growing, and the proliferation of food banks keeps increasing. 850,000 Canadians. Just imagine, every single day, 850,000 people in this country are going to food banks. And the people going to food banks are not those living in the inner cities. They're living in our neighborhoods. They're living amongst us. Their wages are not adequate to maintain their standards of living. There are individuals who are elderly, with disabilities, living amongst us. Of course, poverty is a complex issue. It is related to lack of housing, fair living wages, ineffective social assistance, lack of supports, and food insecurity. We must mention this in the north. Poverty is deepening amongst new immigrants, racialized communities. So what can we do as people of conscience, as people of faith? First, we are obliged to feed the hungry. We are obliged by our faith to feed the hungry. But our assistance must go beyond meeting the immediate needs. We must advocate for the hungry. We must become the voice of the voiceless. Overcoming poverty is an issue of justice. It is honoring the dignity of human beings. There's a quote of Nelson Mandela. He says, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It is an act of justice. It is an act of justice. It is the protection of fundamental rights, the right of dignity to dignity, and the right to a decent life. Unfortunately, today in our very capitalistic societies, we are separating out people into deserving and undeserving poor. Our politicians are doing it. Even in our societies, people are doing it. And this idea has returned into our thinking and discourse. We have to avoid blaming the poor. We have to avoid putting the blame on individuals who are experiencing poverty and stigmatizing them and shaming them. The Quran and all of our scriptures says that God has given dignity to each human being. He has given dignity to each human being. We do not blame the person of the poor for their circumstances. Secondly, we live in this highly competitive, individualistic world. It is easy for us to shift responsibility. To shift responsibility totally on the individual for getting out of their difficulties. And we've also become very easy to accept and resign ourselves to the status quo. It's easy for us to pamper our egos and to give to a food bank. But we must all admit that individual solutions to hunger and poverty will only take us that far. It is only when we come together that we are able to put pressure on the governments. We are able to change this difficult issue that we face. All of our religions are built on helping, wishing for our fellow human beings what we love for ourselves. I want to conclude with some words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. In a very interesting saying, hadith, a prophetic tradition. One day a man came to him and he asked him, he said, what sort of deeds, what sort of actions in Islam are good? What are the good actions in the faith? And the Prophet, peace be on him, he replied, to feed the hungry and to greet those whom you know and those who you do not know. Think about this. He said to feed the hungry and to greet those whom you know and those whom you do not know. Now in this statement there's wisdom. There's profound wisdom. The Prophet, peace be on him, is saying respond. Respond to the poor, but build relationships. Build relationships with your neighbors, those whom you know and those whom you do not know. And it is only when we come together and build relationships that we'll be able to deal with this issue, this injustice of poverty and of child poverty in our society. I thank you for listening attentively at this moment of close to breaking the fast, and I leave you in peace. Assalamu alaikum.